So I don't know if I've introduced myself to you. I am Travis Hatton. I'm the music director of the Beaverton Symphony Orchestra, and this is the pre-concert talks that we do. And now that we're having live audiences again, we are beginning our series of pre-concert talks. Again, they always begin 1/2 an hour before every concert, and I always get somebody in there going, cutting me off because, you know, we do have a concert to do immediately after this. So first of all, I just want to thank you for being here. We are planning on doing every single concert in our series this year. And of course, hopefully they'll get bigger. Audiences will become more and more comfortable. And we're just going to try to boost ourselves up, you know, back to our pre-pandemic audience levels and funding levels eventually, and move on. That's their biggest goal for this year. So far, so good. So far, so good. We have, of course, 3 things that are going on today's concert today. I want to just point out, let me just talk about the first piece first. And I am so proud of the title of this piece. It is called Overture to New Beginnings. I wish I could say that I thought that up, but I did not. And as you may know, that we do this twice a year. We perform pieces by living Northwest composers. You know, we would do more of this if we had more concerts. If we did 8 concerts a year or something like that, I promise you we would do more than just 2. But you know, we have limited concert time, so we just do 2, but this is the first one. And I got to tell you that I programmed this piece. I programmed this piece a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic. And I thought to myself, oh, cool, Overture to New Beginnings. We'll kind of celebrate the new season. Well, it has become so much more than that. And obviously, this is new beginnings beyond the fact that we're just having a new season. This is new beginnings in so many more important ways. So that piece has become even more sort of appropriate for this concert. And Bruce Stark, by the way, who is the composer, is here today. And I will acknowledge him after we perform the piece, and I'll ask him to come up and shake hands, maybe take a little bow for you all. But it's great to have the composer here. In fact, we just had a little interview right back there with him a few minutes ago, just to talk about his piece that we recorded. And hopefully that will be online sometime soon too, or at our website. This is a really interesting piece. Some of this piece is very traditional sounding. By that I mean you'll hear fairly traditional melody, harmonic structures. Some of it is totally not. Some of it is the texture. If you know what I mean by the texture, there's just so many parts going on at one time that really the texture overwhelms anything else and really becomes the most important part of the piece during some sections. You're not supposed to be able to hear melodies in the middle of it. It just is this overwhelming cacophony of sounds. And then, of course, it comes out at the end with the sort of opening melody again in a more traditional sense. And it's a very effective piece. I can tell you for sure it ain't easy. Our violin players let's just say they have mixed feelings about the composer at this point, because it's been a very difficult piece to put together. But I think it's effective. It's a great piece to do for what we're doing here today. And interesting enough, the piece is not a new piece. It's not something that he said, oh, I'm going to write a piece for the coming out of the pandemic. He actually wrote this for the new millennia, 20 years ago. He did not title it Overture to the New Millennia because he knew darn well he didn't want to wait 1,000 years for it to be performed again. So he had a sort of a broader view of it, which works perfectly for us. So hope you enjoy this piece. Bruce Stark, Overture to the New Beginnings. Now, I want to talk about Beethoven. Beethoven. Right? No, I mean, but have you ever heard of Beethoven before? You guys laugh, right? Because the fact is, I can go right out here on Murray Boulevard, walk down the street, go to the gas station, And I could run into, the first person I run into, I could say, excuse me, have you ever heard of Beethoven? That person will say, yes. We are 250 years later on the other side of the world. And we're talking about a man who was born in a poor family in Bonn in 1770, and he says yes. I mean, he may not know, anything about Beethoven. As far as he knows, it may be, a St. Bernard that was in the movies, a few years ago. But that St. Bernard was named Beethoven for a reason, right? And the man himself is iconic. I mean, he's become so recognizable in our culture. I mean, he's like a Napoleon. Have you ever heard of Leonardo da Vinci? Right? I mean, there are these kind of names that have popped up, and Beethoven is one of them. Beethoven is so iconic. And I had just mentioned a moment ago, he was born in 1770, which of course you all know, being educated, symphony goers. And that means that the year 2020 was the 250th anniversary of his birth. And I can tell you for sure, and I conduct a couple different orchestras, celebrations were planned all over. Festivals even organized. And all of them got shut down. All of them got shut down. So what do? The fact is that it's too important not to do something. I mean, we're talking about somebody at the gas station who knows who he is. You do not miss celebrating the 250th anniversary of the birth of Beethoven. You just don't miss it. So we're doing a fantastic symphony of his today in a celebration of that birthday. It's basically what we can do at this point as an homage, acknowledgement of the fact of this great historical milestone. And it is a great historical milestone. I've done this with my other orchestras too, and I really have decided that Beethoven should have the 250th anniversary of his birth more often. Because the music is just so great to work on. The orchestra loves to play it. And it's not like we can just sort of play it and be okay with it. It doesn't matter how long we rehearse it, there's always details that can be done because it's just even though it's 200 years old, the music, it's so intricate even now that it's challenging for not only us, but for the Berlin Philharmonic. That's why he's still being performed all over the world, even now. So it's just, we're happy to be doing the celebration of the 250 plus 1 anniversary of his birth. Can't not do it. So Beethoven. You guys know that I sometimes bring books to these things. Yeah. Okay. Then if that's true, then you probably know that my reading tends to lean towards the nerdy side of reading. Although I have to tell you, I'm reading a book now that my son recommended to me. It's like this fantasy, fiction book. I'm not into it yet, but gosh darn it, I'm going to read it for my son. Okay. And but I do have this. And let me tell you something about, even though I'm a nerdy reader, sometimes people ask me, even me, they say, hey, Travis, can you recommend something? I want to learn something about, a composer or something. Who might you recommend for me to read about? Always, I say Beethoven. Right? For example, the title of this book, Beethoven, Anguish and Triumph. It's first of all, Beethoven is such a great genius that everybody should know more about him. But second of all, his life is something that reads like a novel, a tragic novel in a lot of ways. So not only can you just be captivated by the quality of the music, you can also sympathize, run along with this guy during the course of his life and feel, to a certain degree, the things that he felt in a way that you might in a great novel. So Beethoven is the guy, if you're looking for that recommendation, Beethoven is always number one. And really, there's 3 reasons for that, if I could just sort of outline them for you quickly. Number one is his genius. By the time he was 30 years old, people were, there are countless journal editions from the time in Vienna. I heard Beethoven play today. Oh my goodness, I just don't know what to say. Or this he plays the piano like no one I've ever heard. Or even, I heard Beethoven play today, "My life has been changed." And it's not just one or two. It's dozens. Just the way this man approached the piano and played, it just had to be, it could potentially be life-changing for people at the time. And so just that aspect of his genius is just so monumental that it just wraps you up a little bit. You have to kind of consider learning about him just for that reason. Number two is his life. Oh man, a little messy. First of all, he was, he came to Vienna as a young man, in his early 20s. Started playing piano, immediately made a name for himself because he was just so brilliant. Immediately started composing at first piano pieces, which were just big hits all of a sudden. So here he is, before he's even 30 years old, the most famous pianist, perhaps a famous composer in Europe, even surpassing the great Haydn, who was still alive at the time and still composing. By the way, he had been done writing symphonies, but he was still composing. He was an elderly man, but Beethoven's name was being thrown around with the great Joseph Haydn. And he's not even 30 yet. And guess what happens? He starts going deaf. The one thing, the one disaster that should be avoided at all costs for someone in his position, it starts happening to him. And he begins to realize that it's getting worse, that it's not just some kind of passing ailment. Man, coming to grips with that just had to be terrible, especially at the time. We're talking about 1800. You go to the doctor, and he gives you arsenic for a cure to something. Come on. It's definitely a scary situation, especially, so he tried to hide it for as long as he could. But at some point, of course, he could not hide it. So, and there is a letter there's a couple of letters. One I'll tell you about right now, a letter that he wrote to himself about this time, early 30s, I think 1801, and it was found after he died, in his things. And it's just an incredible, it's called the Heidelberg Testament, is what it's called. And it's extremely moving. It's interesting because he was very eloquent as well. This is extremely well-written letter, just pouring his soul out, almost suicidal sometimes. But here he is, he kind of realizes who he is. And he realizes that he has to do this music for even us today, here and now. And he realizes that he is a person who could potentially change the shape of music forever, which he in fact did. So he continues on. He finds the will to write pieces like, a symphony called Ode to Joy, when he is in fact completely deaf by that time. Amazing. That is amazing. So this is the Anguish triumph thing. Well, what else? He wanted to get married. Always wanted to have a wife and a domestic life. It must be said that Beethoven was not the most easiest person to get along with. It has to be said. Nonetheless, he wanted it so bad, and his other issue was he was born into a lower class family. Now, it's hard for us to really understand these classes that existed in Europe and really all over the world at this time. There was really a line in the sand, and you were either there or you were there, and never shall there be really any mixing, except if you're the servant, you come in through the servant's entrance. If you are an aristocrat, you come in through the front door. There wasn't mixing. Well, Beethoven had an idea about himself that he was maybe, greater than the average lower class person. He certainly was. But the problem is that the two people that he really deeply fell in love with during the course of his life were, of course, from the aristocracy. There's no way that was going to work out. As much as he tried to convince himself that it might, it wasn't going to. Another letter that was found much later than the first one, written probably 10, 12 years later. It was called his letter to the Immortal Beloved. And this has become urban legend also, who this person is. But again, he poured himself out, where he finally came to the realization that no, this aspect of his life that he always wanted, this marriage, this children, this domestic, it just wasn't going to happen for him. More anguish. Okay? So he lived his life alone pretty much, except for, he had friends, of course, but not the kind of relationship with a woman that he always wanted to have. Just didn't happen for him. Number 3, how did this man die? I've always been frustrated trying to figure that out for a lot of people from this time period. Because, like I said, you go to the doctor and he gives you arsenic. Then you die and the doctor says, oh, I don't know why you died. They just didn't know. Even the best doctors. An example is Robert Schumann. This was 30 years after Beethoven died, the mid-19th century. Robert Schumann had a mental illness, He was schizophrenic. And he eventually died in an asylum. And the best doctor in Europe did the autopsy. And they decided that he died of brain disease. Well, what the heck is that? Nobody really knows. They didn't know. So it's often sometimes frustrating to figure out, Mozart, died at the age of 36, right? And he was, buried in kind of a common grave. So we don't know. The urban legends also rose around Mozart's death. Surely there must have been something suspicious in his death, right? But we do know why Beethoven died, because we have, in fact, there's a book called Beethoven's Hair. It's a much thinner book than this one. But it is a book about this man's journey to, they've got some of Beethoven's hair, they know where he's buried, and they got a couple bone samples and made an analysis of this. Beethoven died of lead poisoning. Now, lead poisoning is not something that you die of over the course of a couple of weeks. So here, to pile on Beethoven's anguish in his life, he died over the course of years, probably slowly and painfully, of lead poisoning. The coincidental sort of romantic, tragic, but he did live to be 57 years old, which at the time was pretty normal lifespan, So it's not like he died young, but, you pile all this on with a man who even late in his life, while dying of lead poisoning and totally deaf, was writing a symphony called Ode to Joy, which is maybe one of the great pieces of art, period, in Western culture, composed by this man under these circumstances. Wow, you got to read about Beethoven. You have to read about Beethoven if you want to know something about a composer. This is the newest and best biography, and I'll admit it's kind of thick, but there's a lot of analysis in here that you can kind of just skip over. When they start talking about, the details of the Symphony No.3, just, go on to the next part where they talk about his biography. But this is a book by Jan Schwafford, which was only published, I think, about 7 or 8 years ago. Imagine the guts. Do you think that by 2012 there had been a few things written about Beethoven? So this guy says, I'm going to write a new biography about Beethoven. That takes a lot of guts. But here it is. This is the best biography there is published on Beethoven. So it is in itself is a triumph, the book itself. So it's by Jan Schwafford. It's called Beethoven, Anguish and Triumph. And like I said, you get I read this book and I felt closer to him. And I love this book, therefore. So I would recommend it to you, although it's heavy reading. So you could take it and do some curls with it or something and actually get something out of it besides just reading. But I would definitely recommend Beethoven. Now, I've got to tell you a little bit about the piece. Well, okay, Mahler. The Beethoven Symphony No.7 is a great piece. You will love it. How many of you have never heard it before in live performance? Anybody here? You all have. Just one. Well, you know what? Okay, a couple. You know what? I'm really excited for you. I'm really excited for you. I told somebody I was rehearsing this piece a few weeks ago, somebody who was educated about music but was not necessarily a musician. I said I happen to be, and I'm rehearsing a Beethoven symphony. And that person said, oh, is it the ba-ba-ba-ba one? And I had to say, no. No, it's not. But I have figured out how to identify this symphony for those people. I said, it's the King's Speech one. And if you've seen that movie, then you know what I'm talking about, right? At the very most important place in the movie where the king is finally making the speech. He had a speech impediment, right? He's telling England that we're going back to war. And obviously difficult for him to do. It starts just totally silent because he can't get the first words out. And then there's this music that starts. And then he starts to speak. And the music builds. And he's speaking, it becomes more, it's fantastic. You know, this is a big budget Hollywood film. They could have paid somebody many thousands of dollars to write a piece of music, or they could have used any piece of music in the past couple of hundred years to accompany this part of the scene. They used the second movement from the Symphony No.7 by Beethoven. And it's perfect. Perfect. So this is how you can use this too. Oh, it's the King's Speech Symphony. So people will, a lot of people will understand what that means. We do have a piece by Mahler today too. I'm rushing to the end. I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave these books over here by the front counter if you want to take a look at them and get some information. This is also a hefty book. I'm sorry. But whoever has the most definitive biography of Mahler, this is still up for debate. Okay, this is a good one. I like it very much. Not very old, within the past 10 years, a wonderful publication. Mahler, also a very interesting figure, 100 years later than Beethoven, of course, and really super interesting character in that there are some people alive today who still have some kind of distant connection with him. I could claim one myself. I ran, while I was in Europe some 25, 30 years ago, I ran into a man named Georg Tintner, who was born in Vienna in like 1816, 1817, was in the Vienna Boys Choir, and then went to the Vienna Conservatory, where he studied composition and theory with Felix Weingartner, who was the man who took over the job of the Vienna Staatsoper after Mahler left. So I mean, maybe third person removed, but still he's still not completely out of the contemporary picture yet. And now I got to tell you about this piece. People don't know this that much. Mahler wrote a lot of songs. You think of his symphonies, which are gigantic symphonies, at least an hour long, some of them pushing 2 hours long. So giant symphonies. He once said the symphony should be like the world. And he pretty much put everything in the world inside of each one of his symphonies. But he also wrote a lot of songs. And he orchestrated them. So we are hearing today a group of 4 songs that all go together that he actually wrote the text for, which is also unusual. Now I got to tell you that these songs are kind of downer songs. Okay, this is not happy-go-lucky stuff. Okay, you should probably read through the text before you hear this, because it is very beautiful music and very moving, but it's depressing. Okay, I'll just tell you that right off the bat. Very typical Mahler in a lot of ways. So prepare yourselves for that. Also prepare yourselves for the fact that the piece ends with a little whimper. I mean, it's not like, I'm going to end the first half of this program with a little ba, 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 ba. Okay, intermission. So that's what's going on. And I have to tell you also, I have some bad news for you. There's no cookies. Now stay in your seats, please. Okay, I know half of you are out of here already, right? Well, we promised to have cookies back again sometime. Okay, but under the current circumstances, we just decided that it wasn't a good idea for us to all gather and eat cookies together while wearing masks in this particular environment. That's temporary. This is temporary, this whole mask thing. It really is. I promise. I shouldn't make these promises, but we are going to get back to cookies because you know that we serve the best cookies in the Portland metro area.
Yeah,
So,
more cookies
yeah.
here than
I know. How about that? And so I have to apologize. No cookies. I still hope you enjoy the concert. Even without the cookies today. All right, guys. I just got the this going on here. I want to thank you. I want to thank you not only for being here for this pre-concert talk, but for being here today. You guys are awesome. It's so great to have you here. You mean so much to us. You really, really do. And I really thank you for coming to this, and thank you for coming to the concert. And we'll see you in a couple of minutes out there. You don't have to rush to your seats because they're not going to start without me. And I have farther to go than you do. All right. Thank you again very much.